Hello, everybody, from Vittorio Campanile here. Another episode of Lazio Lounge. No football, unfortunately, but Alison McKenzie, hello, how are you? We have a lot of things to talk about. A legend of Lazio, Alessandro Nesta, the captain of the Secondo Scudetto. I know you remember very well that year, but we are here to talk about the career of Alessandro Nesta, his relationship with Lazio, and if we'll ever see him again managing Lazio in the future, who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, the reason we're doing this, I suppose we've been away for a couple of weeks, so sorry to everyone who's obviously been missing us. But now seems like a good time to talk a little bit about the past, some of the iconic players we've had. And it was quite interesting, Vittorio. You sent out a tweet a week or so ago asking people what player they thought of when they think of Lazio, and we got all sorts of responses, which kind of gave us this idea. And then when it came to people wanting to discuss certain players, Alessandro Nesta was the clear number one place to go. And I guess that's because for a lot of people, he is Mr. Lazio.
Well, maybe for the generation of our followers, for my era, let's call it like this, probably Beppe Signori was the first name you have in mind. I started going at the stadium with Beppe Signori signing for Lazio. So, well, at the beginning I had Riedel and Sosa as the two strikers. Maybe you don't even know them. But, Beppe Signori was the change, the first thing changing for Lazio, starting to compete to high level. But probably Alessandro Nesta is the most famous player of Lazio, coming from Rome, starting from Lazio Primavera, winning the Scudetto on Lazio Primavera, and then making the jump to La Prima Squadra and winning the title with us. So, yeah.
You're giving away all the spoilers here.
We can wrap it up here. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, well, I think we were just discussing before we came on how best to do this. I think what we'll do is kind of run through his time at Lazio, because I think that especially, you talk about your generation, but actually even, for my generation, Nesta, for many people, is remembered kind of for the 2006 World Cup win, maybe even though he got injured early in that tournament, but for his time with Italy, for his time with Milan, winning the Champions League twice, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes it's easy to forget how long he was at Lazio, which was for longer than he was at Milan, obviously. But if we start at the start, I found when I was kind of researching Nesta's career earlier on today, that one of my favorite parts of this whole story is probably the first part of it, which is that he joined Lazio in 1985. So he was only 9 years old at this time. But even before this point, there's been a huge kind of Rome derby in his life, because it was Roma who first scouted Alessandro Nesta, who first saw his potential, and who made an offer for Alessandro Nesta to join their youth ranks. Apparently with an offer of about 10 million lira, which at the time was a fair bit of money for a 9-year-old. But his dad was such a big Lazio fan, the story goes, that he said no, he'll never have his son playing for Roma. And instead he picked up the phone to Lazio and asked them for a trial. And then obviously once he turned up, he was signed up. I didn't actually know about that side of this story until I was reading about it today, but it's an amazing start to this tale, I think.
Well, in Rome is very normal, I would say, these type of things. If your family, it's a Lazio family, then they'll try to do a trial with Lazio. I remember when I was playing football that I started to train even the 10 years old kids of my club, and the group ahead of me, there was this Albanian striker who was really, really good, and the manager, the owner of that small club, was a Lazio fan like me, and said, okay, let's organize a trial, and we sent him to Lazio, and he arrived till the Primavera of Lazio and then switched to Roma, but that's another fact. So
I thought you were going to say, and it was Iglitare.
No, unfortunately, it didn't work out very well for him, unfortunately. But so that happened a lot of time, So it's funny to remember this. Yes, Nesta is a Lazio fan. Went to Lazio because his dad was a Lazio fan. And how many derbies did he play against Francesco Totti? Because they were the same age, and Lazio Roma obviously was playing every year against, and so he started playing against Totti when he was 10.
I think even earlier than that, I saw an interview with him where he said, well, Totti was before he'd even arrived in Roma's youth ranks, they were playing against each other as 8-year-olds. And I guess that's the great shame. And I think we've spoken about this before. We'll get on to when he leaves the club later on. But this rivalry between him and Totti feels like a real missed part of Lazio history, where that should have been something that went on, almost eternally, but didn't. We had a few questions from people who wanted to ask us certain parts about Nesta's career. And one of them, well, half of one from Jeppe Rod Nielsen was about whether Nesta was a Laziale as a young kid, or if it was just a coincidence that he ended up on that side of the divide. So I think that story kind of explains that side of the story. But yeah, I mean, moving on a little bit. So supposedly back then, I mean, I guess this would go for most kids coming through the ranks, but he was playing in midfield to begin with, even as a winger. And you see that a lot. It's a well-known story. Even Manuel Neuer, part of the reason kind of defensive players are so good technically is they start in different ends of the pitch. Like you mentioned, though, he won the Primavera Scudetto. Eventually got his senior debut. It was when Dino Zoff was coach, one of the times Dino Zoff was coach. So this was 1994 now we're on to. But he first made his breakthrough into the first team in 95-96. That was when he became a regular in the Lazio team, became a first choice, and ended up winning the under-21 with Euros with Italy at the end of that season.
But you're missing one of the funniest part of Alessandro Nesta's story.
Go on then.
Well, when he was still in Primavera, you know that Primavera and the first squad on Thursday had friendly matches sometimes. And guess who broke the leg of Paul Gascoigne in one of these?
Of course.
So, what a good start, right? I break the leg of probably the most popular player of my team. And knowing Nesta, we all know that it wasn't a bad tackle. It wasn't a bad tackle. It was just he tried to go to the ball and didn't get it, and he injured Gascoigne. Was very unlucky, Gascoigne, with Lazio. He got injured a lot, and the first time probably a lot of people read the name of Nesta on the paper was for that, because he was the player that injured Gascoigne when he still was in Primavera.
Yeah, like it's particularly funny because a guy, I suppose, who made his name as being a very elegant defender and not a physical defender particularly at all. And then, yeah, like you say, probably one of the most devastating injuries that happened in that era, to be honest, given the expense that was spent on Gascoigne and his ability. But yeah, I mean, anyway, feel free to just jump in with the anecdotes as we go. I found when I was looking at the under 21 Euros that they won, I was having a quick look at that. I found it quite interesting because he scored a penalty. They won it on penalties in a shootout against Spain in the final. And looking at the Italy team on there, that was a Cesare Maldini's team. You've got Totti, you've got Tomasi, there's quite Panucci, a few kind of Roman players in that team, but the player who missed a penalty for Spain, the first penalty for Spain that essentially lost them the shootout, was Ivan de la Peña as well, which is quite interesting. Worlds colliding. But yeah, I mean, so he did actually end up getting called up to the Italy squad for Euro 96 after that season, even though he didn't play. But I mean, from your recollection of that time around kind of 96, a year later, 97, I mean, he was only 21, 22 at this time, and he was already made captain of Lazio. So just how much kind of excitement was there about him, about what he was going to be able to do at that point?
Well, that was a very, very, very good Lazio Primavera. Lazio win the Scudetto, and everybody around was talking about Alessandro Nesta and Marco Di Vaio. Those were the two great stars. Then there were other players like Iannuzzi, if I'm not wrong, was of that era, of that generation as well. But everybody said Lazio has two great talent, Alessandro Nesta in defense and Marco Di Vaio as a striker. And Marco Di Vaio made his debut, I think, 1 year later and scored immediately with Lazio. So, they were really popular. Nesta was playing left back when he was in the Primavera and made his debut as a left back, and then was moved central with the Zenit Zeman. And, immediately as he started playing, he was amazing to see. And one thing very funny is that when you hear him in the first interview when he was very young, he was saying that his idol was José Chamot, the Argentinian player of Lazio, which was very fast, but wasn't a great defender. And it was funny to hear a player of that talent talking about, Chamot is a great defender. I like him very much. I get inspired by him. But and obviously, one thing was that he started with Zoff, but then Lazio switched to Zeman. And as maybe a lot of our listeners know, Zeman was a very risky type of football. And so Nesta was often forced to play one against one, or recovering the striker that was all alone against the goalkeeper. And even playing that difficult position, Nesta shined. He was simply unbelievable. So, it was terrific to see him play like that.
I was going to say, I do wonder, it's a really interesting point, how much, a guy who kind of made his name for the way he read the game was amazing. That his anticipation of where the ball would be when. Obviously, he had a lot of pace for a defender, like you already said. But I wonder how much of that side of his game, the intelligence, the positional intelligence to be able to read where to go when, came from the fact that he, at such a young age, just had to play that way because of the fact that Zeman's football was so attack orientated that there was a lot more space for him to cover at the back. Do you think there's anything to that?
Well, I think this and even Mimmo Caso was a very good manager for youngsters. So he grew in a very good school, I would say. The funny thing is, he's a very shy guy, especially at the beginning. He outside the pitch, he's really shy. While inside the pitch, he would transform and be a completely different person. I thought he became captain of Lazio a little bit too early. He wasn't the leader of the team, but I think he was such a complete defender that he had everything. He was really complete, and so he can control very well the situation.
So in terms of him being given that captaincy, like I said, so that was the start of the 97-98 season. Still very young. Why do you think, is it as simple as the fact that this is a guy who's come through the youth ranks, this is a boyhood Lazio fan? How much of it do you think was the not almost appeasing the fans, by giving them their homegrown hero as a captain at that age? It's like a sign of a bright future. Do you think it was an element of that, or was it the case that he was already a born leader at that point and the natural captain?
No, I don't think he was a born leader. I thought it was a smart idea, a smart marketing idea by Sergio Cragnotti. He's the face of Lazio. He is the youngster that grew up from the club, and it's the best defender in Italy, and the images of Lazio as Totti was becoming the image of Roma. So, as I said before, I don't think he was a leader, especially, going forward, thinking about the team that won the Scudetto. You had Mancini, you had Veron, you had Mihajlovic, you had a lot of charismatic players, and Nesta wasn't that charismatic, I thought. But, he was the face of Rome, of Lazio, the great defender, I think in the plan of Cragnotti, he should have been the face of the club.
Well, born leader or not, looking at that first season now of his captaincy, 97-98, I mean, it went pretty well. especially, I suppose, considering the kind of growth of the club at that time, the development under Cragnotti, what he was building. This was the first time, and you pointed this out before when we were talking about our most treasured Lazio moments, the Coppa Italia final against AC Milan at the end of that season. Back then, there were two legs to the final. The return leg was the one in Rome. Lazio had lost the first leg 1-0. They win the second leg 3-1, and guess who scores the third goal? And there he goes off straight under the Curva Nord in celebration. I mean, you've already mentioned this as being your top moment, really, as a Lazio fan. So What was it about that, and what was kind of Nesta's role in that game for you that you remember?
Well, we have to say that even the first leg, Lazio played much better than AC Milan, and they scored an incredible goal. It was a long ball from the goalkeeper. The defense was surprised by header, and Weah was simply unstoppable running against the goal. I think Nesta, but all the teams step up after Bertini scored, because Milan scored at the beginning of the second half, and people thought it was finished. And then Gottardi comes in. We have to talk about Gottardi once. It's perfect to think that Alessandro Nesta, the captain, the youngster born in Lazio, etc., scored that goal. And if you see now the images, you see that he still didn't believe it, that he scored the winning goal. And under the Curva Nord, he came there celebrating. It was overwhelming. It was unbelievable.
Should say for those who haven't seen it that this wasn't a 30-yard screamer from long range. This was a classic centre back's goal, kind of stabbing it in when it's basically already in from close range in a crowded box kind of goal. But don't take anything away from the man.
Yeah, when did he score that great goal that he dribbled past everybody? I remember Nesta did one of the. I think he was in Coppa UEFA or Champions League.
Well, I know he only scored one goal in Serie A for Lazio in almost 200 games against Salernitana, I think it was. So yeah, I mean, he wasn't exactly a prolific marksman. So but I think it's very fitting, and it does help. It feeds the legend a bit. The fact that not only was he captain for a big historic moment like that, the first major trophy of this period, but that he had his name on the score sheet. I think it does help kind of develop that link with the fans. It helps develop that legend, which was, I would say, probably at this stage already growing. You've got this homegrown guy. One thing I've not said yet is that he won Young Player of the Season in Serie A that year as well. So, I mean, this is a guy who's, by this stage, not only becoming a fan favourite or already an established fan favourite with Lazio fans, but is becoming one of the big players, I think, in Italy at the time.
Absolutely. He was, at that time, Italy had probably the best defence ever. Cannavaro, Maldini, Nesta, we had a couple of good defenders, and Nesta was the youngest of them, and he was really, really interesting. And then he scored that goal, and it's funny because usually it was a corner kick. Lazio needed a third goal to win the cup, and it was a corner kick. And if you go back and watch all Lazio match, Nesta was hardly going in the box on the corners. Instead, that time he went, and it was an incredible goal. He was fast enough because Rossi, that was Milan goalkeeper, deflected the shot. I don't remember who was it to shoot. Maybe no, I don't remember. And Nesta anticipated Mancini, because otherwise Mancini would have scored. And it's strange if you think about it, but yeah, it's an incredible moment. And again, I thought without all those injuries, we're going to talk about it, Nesta's career could have been terrific. He could probably turn out to be the best Italian defender ever.
Well, I think it says a lot about him that he is kind of in that discussion now, despite the injuries. And it's good timing you've said that, because that was kind of the next thing I was going to get onto, was the 98 World Cup. because at the end of this season, he goes off to France with the Italy team. And then in just the second group game, I think against Austria, he goes and does his knee ligaments. And he's out for, I think, over half a year. I mean, I don't think he comes back until a good midway through the 98-99 season. And I think that's probably the first of what would be quite a lot of bad luck, really, with injuries. But, I mean, in this case, he at least bounces back from it pretty well, because when he does come back into the team, in that season, I mean, that is an incredible season, that the way they finish it anyway, in terms of winning the Cup Winners' Cup. They go on to win the Super Cup, obviously, at the other end of that summer. And we just spoke about this a little bit before coming on air, but the Scudetto, okay, that's the one part of the season that didn't end very well, but from I think a 7-point advantage, they let it all slip and lose the league by 1 point on the final day of the season, I think. So, but even so, I mean, what are your recollections of that season in terms of Nesta's comeback from injury? What kind of impact it made?
Well, first of all, we have to remember that all started from that Coppa Italia. Winning the Coppa Italia, Lazio went and played the Coppa delle Coppe and won it. Then winning the Coppa delle Coppe, you go and play the European Super Cup and you won it, etc. Well, you know, that summer was quite complicated because Cragnotti was so upset. He wanted to sue the national team because said, you know, we lost one of our key players. And in that period, especially at the beginning of the season, a lot of newspaper, you know, the Corriere dello Sport, but a lot of radio thought that Lazio lost the Scudetto because Nesta got injured and missed the first 6 months of the season. And you can argue that it was a fact, you know, you lost the best defender. And at that time, Lazio didn't have amazing defender apart from Nesta. So, you know, that was a big problem for the club. And so you spend the first 6 months thinking, okay, where could Lazio be? Where would Lazio be with Nesta playing instead of being injured? And then there's the second part of the season when Nesta come back. And obviously, when you come back from a big injury like that, you start well, and then you start to struggle because you lose shape and you're not fit enough. So the problem for the team was that Nesta had to play to recover his form, but wasn't playing amazingly like before. So with a club that was fighting for the title, it wasn't easy. So, you know, it was a difficult season for Lazio fan and for Nesta to come back and try to play this football. But, you know, winning the Coppa delle Coppe was a great achievement, an incredible achievement. It was true that with Eriksson, things have changed. In that time, if you remember, Lazio was playing a different football. Mancini came in. So Mihajlovic started playing for Lazio. So, you know, it was a different team. And Nesta wasn't the only star of the club, I thought. So it was things changing a little bit.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at that team on paper now, and it is absolutely staggering, really, to see the lineup of players that they had at the time. I mean, you know, it's worth mentioning as well. Well, there's a lot of success around this time. They also did actually reach the UEFA Cup final that season before as well, which they lost to Inter. But I mean, it's almost, you know, sometimes it's almost easy to forget that even happened because there were so many successes in this era that would be, let's have no doubt about it, reaching the Europa League final nowadays would be counted as a success in itself. So it says a lot about the standards that they were setting, I think, at this time, that was a failure, I suppose, in comparison to everything else going on. Losing the league by a point as well. I mean, it's incredible to think of all the success Lazio had, all the trophies they won in this kind of 2-3 year spell, that it could have been even greater, that it could have been two consecutive Scudetti, and another European trophy, and that they were literally 2 games away from letting that happen.
And I went to that final in Paris with a friend. We went driving from Rome to Paris, and obviously I felt sick that night. I had like 39 degrees of fever, and still I went to the match, and it was terrible. Not only because Lazio played terrible, but because I was feeling so sick, and I was there nearly dead. And yeah, unfortunately, Lazio.
This along with your Scudetto celebration migraine, I think it's not good for your health, all this.
No, absolutely. That's why the Coppa Italia was amazing, because I didn't feel sick. And you know, everybody was thinking that Inter was the favorite for that final, and I thought that instead it was Lazio, because we had Nesta, we had Pavel Nedved, we had so many good players, and instead they didn't show up in that final, and even Nesta didn't play as well. And you know, I thought we could have won it, and yeah, that was hard to swallow, to be honest with you, because you can see that Lazio was building up, growing, and winning a Coppa UEFA would have made a big difference for the brand awareness, in the international brand awareness of Lazio.
Well, anyway, I mean, moving on after all this, so the Cup Winners' Cup in the 98-99 season, then losing the Scudetto marginally, started 99-2000 with that win over Manchester United. I was just saying to you before we came on, I watched that game in full yesterday, and I mean, that game wasn't about Nesta really, but he was just amazing in that game. I mean, it was incredible to watch. And I know you've already said before we came on that maybe Ferguson didn't give Lazio enough respect. Maybe they were missing, Dwight York and Ryan Giggs, for example, in that game. But still, just his timing of everything, just his judgment of when to go, when to stay. It was a bit of a kind of quiet masterclass, I would say. I think it was a great example of the kind of player he was. But then what went on to happen after that was even greater, obviously. The first and only time that Lazio won the double, the Scudetto and the Coppa Italia in one season.
And the Supercoppa. Come on.
And the Supercoppa, of course. Losing count now. I mean, it was an amazing period in terms of the trophies that were stacking up. We're not here today to talk about the Scudetto season. I mean, that in itself, if we're going to deserves its own podcast. But I suppose what I want to ask you was, what kind of a role do you think Nesta played in allowing that to happen, both as the defender that he'd become by this point, one of, if not the best centre-backs in Italy, and as a captain as well? What kind of role do you think he played in it overall?
Well, one thing, going back even to the question they asked, Nesta was not only the captain, but he was a Lazio fan. And when you play for your team, you give a little bit extra, you give something more, and you feel you it's not your job, it's not only a job, it's your passion. And so you can feel when Nesta was disappointed because Lazio lost, or happy because the team won, etc. I thought he gave some extra. Roberto Mancini was the type of player who hated to lose. So when he was losing, he was terrible. Nesta hated to lose because it was Lazio, and I thought he gave some extra when he was playing for Lazio. And especially at the beginning of the career, I said it a little bit, Lazio defense was terrible, or at least it wasn't that good as in the last period of Nesta at Rome. So I thought in the first part of his career, he had to play like for the other defenders as well. While here, it was a little bit different. He can focus only on his area, on his zone. But you have to say something. Lazio defense was low because either it was Mihajlovic or Couto. Both players were very physical, but not fast. And so, Nesta was really important when Lazio was playing against fast attacker that would put in big problem Mihajlovic or Couto. So I thought that was one of the key of Nesta playing football for Lazio. And, I think the rest of the team played with more confidence, knowing that, okay, we have Nesta behind us. If something goes bad, he will take care of it. So I think that was giving extra confidence to the team as well.
Yeah, and it's amazing looking at that team that the kind of I just mentioned how the kind of star-studded names that you see on that team sheet. The more of them are in attack and in midfield than they are in defence. I mean, Luca Marchegiani, for all his abilities, wasn't one of the world's top goalkeepers at the time. Likewise, the defence. You've got a lot of good players, but not apart from Nesta. You might say any of the kind of stars on the same level as your Verons or your Nedveds, who are just at another level at that time.
Well, Sergio Gragnotti was a Real Madrid president type of owner. He needed the show, and defenders are not spectacular. It's not Veron. It's you don't buy a defender because it's spectacular. Well, you can say that Mihalovic was spectacular, as he's a specialist of free kicks, but Gragnotti wanted the show, so Veron, Mancini, Nedved, all these type of players were coming to Rome, and not that many defenders. Even though I thought at that time Marchegiani was probably the best goalkeeper in Italy after Peruzzi. So, but Negro was an attacking defender, I would say. Pancaro wasn't great, but you need those type of players. So obviously, Lazio defense wasn't the best part of it, but with Nesta, it made everything better.
You need your Patricks and your Bastos to make it all work. That's what you're saying. I hear you.
Absolutely. But the thing is, I was thinking today, Kota was a bench player in that year. He would be a starting player this season for Lazio.
Yeah, I mean, that guy always absolutely infuriated me because he was just the most unpredictable defender I think I've ever seen in my life. But actually, he kind of set the tone for a lot of unpredictable Lazio centre-backs, if I'm honest. Anyway, that's another discussion. I think we need to move on with Nesta now at this point. I mean, so the end of that season, all that success, off he goes to the Euros. You already mentioned, that defence they had at the time with Maldini, Cannavaro. I mean, incredible team. They make it to the final. Concede just 2 goals on the way. They lose to France. Sorry, Vittorio, on golden goal. But then I think we have to move on really to the sad goodbye. Really. So 2002, off he goes. AC Milan come in, 31 million euros, I believe. Now, first thing to say, obviously, is what in part this has been remembered for, which is the fact that the club was in a bit of a financial mess by this stage. Well, with Cragnotti's business was in a mess at least. And he was kind of forced into a position of needing to sell off his biggest assets, of which Nesta was one. And Nesta has said later on, at least, that his dream was always that he wanted to stay at Lazio, but that it wasn't possible. How much did that hurt at the time? I mean, was it clear to you as a fan in the summer of 2002 that things were going wrong, that things were going to be quite as catastrophic as they were? And what was it like hearing that news? We'll get onto the Juve game and all that side of things as well.
I think it was the worst moment as a Lazio fan, of my generation. It was terrible, heartbreaking. I try to not remember that period because it was so bad. And the fact was that I was working near Milan Channel at that time. I was in the same building with them, and they were so confident that they would sign Alessandro Nesta, while Cagnotti was saying, no, we're going to sell Oli Crespo. And then suddenly he sold both of them. And, it was heartbreaking because, we sold Vieri the year of the Scudetto. But, he wasn't a Lazio fan, Nesta, as I said at the beginning, he was the symbol of Lazio. And so selling him like that was terrible. I still think that he could have other options instead of selling Nesta. Uh, it's true, Cragnotti was in a difficult moment, and I think it could have been done differently because the fans were unaware of everything. They didn't expect this movement, and Nesta didn't know what to do. So I think, yeah, it was very confusing, very sad for both parts, and I think it was probably the worst moment for a Lazio fan.
I mean, I think from his side, the message has always been that his hands were tied, and if it was up to him, this wouldn't have happened. But then there is obviously this kind of difficult goodbye because, and we spoke about this previously, but the fact that he never really said goodbye to the fans was something that left a bit of a sour taste in the mouth, I think, for many, and made people start perhaps even questioning his loyalty, questioning his decision. Whether he was included in this decision or not. Did you find yourself buying into that? Was that a feeling that was I suppose common at the time? Were people turning against him a bit?
I think maybe because he was shy, he didn't make the right move or saying goodbye to the fan. He talked about it. I don't remember how many years ago, and said he were aware at the beginning of the summer already that he would have been sold. So he was aware of everything, but so he should have expected that, but didn't do nothing. So from the fan point of view, I think everybody was upset. Everybody was very upset with Nesta, and the first Lazio Milan, everybody showed it. So it's sad that things ended that way, and I think it could have been handled better by both parties, Cragnotti and Nesta.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that as well. The first time he comes back in an AC Milan shirt. I mean, that was one of the comments we got was from Steven Scarpullo, who mentioned that his first live Lazio match was that game when Nesta came back to the Olimpico with Milan. And he was asking you, Vitor, if you were whistling or clapping at the time. And has that changed now? We know more. And you quickly reassured him that you're actually in Milan at the time to try and dodge the question. But
bring him back.
But I mean, it does sound, at least from from what Stephen said there, but also from the kind of reports around that time, like there was this kind of divide, I suppose, amongst the support of those who were applauding him, who were willing to appreciate and applaud what he'd done for the club, and those who felt angry and betrayed, I suppose, by the way he'd left.
Yeah, there was even the banner in the Curva Nord saying, "You forgot to say goodbye. We said it for you, goodbye." And so this tells you a lot. And yeah, they were divided, but I would say 75% of the fans was booing Nesta and only 25 was cheering. That was probably the moment, the sign of the end of an era, the end of the dreams of Lazio winning titles, etc. So fans were really disappointed.
Do you think so? Do you think that's the moment that people realized it's all going down?
Yeah.
And I mean, the one thing, I don't know, it was interesting when I was reading about this earlier. I don't know if it'd be interesting to hear what you think, if this actually made a difference or not. But my impression is that, those who were against him at the time have since softened, and Nesta is now remembered as one of the greats. And I think people do appreciate his reasons for moving, perhaps, like you say, because he's a shy guy, that he took it on in the wrong way, but not out of malicious nature. But then he was also owed €2 million worth of wages, and half of it he just converted into shares to help the club's financial situation, put it back into the club instead of demanding it in the way that many others would. So there were kind of signs, I suppose, even if perhaps he wasn't someone who approached it in the right way, who approached it publicly in the way that some wanted him to. There were other ways in which he showed his loyalty, showed his support.
Yeah, and unfortunately, as I was there, I remember the face of Nesta when he got presented by Milan, and it wasn't the face of a happy guy. How many players do you see, get it doing the press conference, joining Milan and not laughing, not being, smiling at all? You can see that he wasn't happy, and he didn't want to.
Lucas Biglia turning up and saying Forza Lazio.
Yeah, same. So, it was really a bad moment for Lazio fan and for Nesta. Then obviously things changed. He won the Champions League, etc. Again, I would have never sold him to AC Milan. If I would try to sold him. I would have tried to sell him to Manchester United, like you did with Veron, etc.
Get him out of the country.
Yeah, I thought Milan was not very. How can I put it? Regular.
Say what you think.
They cheated a little bit. They put too much pressure on Cragnotti. They forced him to sell him to him, and even the price was lower than expected. So,
Well, even so he leaves Lazio after 9 seasons, 193 Serie A games, a whole load of trophies, not many goals, but a few important ones. We're not going to talk about his time at Milan, but yeah, needless to say, he wins quite a lot of trophies there as well. Ends up finishing his career probably not in the way some people expected when he had his big goodbye at Milan, and then instead he goes off to Canada, joins Montreal Impact, and then ends up in India with Marco Materazzi for a year at Chennai. So one of the questions we got, and I guess one of the questions that torments people quite a lot, is on why he never came back. Siamak Tundra Nafisi says, "For me, gents, it's the obvious question. The story of why we couldn't get Nesta back for his last few seasons to retire at Lazio." And yeah, I mean, I guess that is a question that's come up time and again. And it's interesting as well that he has spoken about this, and he has said, I mean, I saw an interview today where he was basically talking about having a chat with Massimo Oddo in 2007 and basically told him this is why Oddo was captain, and said, look, I'm up for coming back to Lazio if they'll have me. Can you put in a word? And nobody ever got in touch with him. Now, he doesn't know if that's because Oddo never passed on the message or the message never got through or whatever, but he does claim he was open to the idea and it just never happened. What do you think are the main reasons for this?
Well, Lotito at that time spoke often about Nesta and said he was a Finnish player and Lazio didn't buy Finnish player. It could have been true. I mean, that was the ending part of the career of Nesta, but it would have been nice to finish his career at Lazio, a little bit like. I don't know if the words of Lotito was to hide the fact that Lazio could afford to pay Nesta salary. Maybe that's one of the part. Or, Lotito didn't like that much Nesta. I don't know for which reasons. But yeah, we all knew that Nesta was open to come back to Rome, but Lotito didn't want it. So that's a fact why he didn't come back.
Yeah, I mean, my suspicion on that has always been around the same thing that we come back to time and again with Lotito, is that he is very, very careful with how he spends his money. And the way I see it, I think it's debatable that if we're talking about 2007, that Nesta was a finished player. I mean, he still had quite a few good years ahead of him then. But I guess a player with that, even if they haven't talked about salary or transfer fee or whatever it might be, a player of that level isn't going to come for nothing. And I guess Lotito, I mean, even now, I mean, he's loosened the purse strings in the last few years, but around that period, you know, Lazio were not spending an awful lot of money on players or on salaries. And I guess to bring in an injury-prone guy at the wrong end of his career, you can imagine Lotito being the kind of president who is capable of taking the emotion completely out of the situation and just seeing it the way it was in his eyes. Whether that's right or wrong is another question, though.
No, absolutely, and you have to be honest, as you said, Nesta was injury-prone. His back was creating a lot of problems to him. He wasn't able to play a lot of consecutive matches, and signing him would have mean get another defender to play all the time that he wasn't fit already. Again, it would have been nice to see him back to Lazio. We can say that at the beginning of his career, Lotito made a lot of mistakes and often said the wrong things, like in this case. The funny thing is that Nesta now it's open to go back to Lazio as a manager. But my question is, how is the relationship between him and Lotito? Have Nesta forget of Lotito saying that Nesta was done? And it's funny because even Cagnotti, when he sold it to Milan, said that Nesta was, on the end of his career, wasn't the Nesta that we saw at Rome, which I can agree with. I mean, I thought Lazio saw the best Nesta. He won more trophy with Milan, but probably the best Nesta we ever saw was the one in Rome. Obviously, with Milan, he had, Maldini and all those great defenders close to him. So he didn't have to play as Nesta anymore. But, I think it's a shame. It would have been great to have him back like we had Di Canio.
Yeah, well, I mean, talking about Nesta, the coach, if people aren't aware, I mean, he's in charge of Frosinone now. He was at Perugia last season, took them to the playoffs in Serie B, which where they lost to Verona, I think it was. But now they're kind of up there, looking to get promoted. I mean, he is kind of going through the hard yards. He's not doing what people Inzaghi or whoever else Milan have appointed over the years has done and just jumped straight into the biggest job. But
yep.
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to see that happen. I guess, we had one of the questions we had was about why we can't get him in a role like Peruzzi to be someone who comes in and trains our young defenders. Well, the main reason for that is because he's a coach and he's wanting to do a lot more than that. But interestingly, I mean, one of the other questions we had was from Jeppe Nielsen again, was about his relationship with Inzaghi. Jeppe Nielsen said that his idea was that Nesta has always been a bit condescending towards Inzaghi in interviews, which I find quite an interesting point. I mean, it's generally quite interesting hearing Inzaghi's old teammates talk about him being a coach, because they are generally all quite surprised about how good he is at it. Then there's that famous game Milan-Lazio moment where Nesta slaps Inzaghi in the face, and it seems like, I don't know, there's at least a certain level of beef in that match. But do you think there's anything to that, or they get on just fine?
No, I think Inzaghi had a good relationship with all the former Lazio player. Obviously, as we said, on that team you had Mihajlovic, you had Veron, you had Mancini, Salas, Nedved, etc. Inzaghi was probably not the most rated player. So, he wasn't that charismatic leader. I think that's why everybody's surprised to see him becoming such a good manager. You could expect Mancini, you could expect Mihajlovic, you could expect Veron becoming a manager. But, Simone Inzaghi, a striker who wants always to score goals, etc., it's not the profile of the perfect manager. So, I spoke with Delio Rossi a couple of years ago, and he said, I have to be honest, I didn't expect him to be a good manager. Then now, if you hear him on interview, he said, "Yeah, he was a great player, blah blah blah." But he said, honestly, I didn't expect at all. He said that he wasn't very serious in training and so on. Uh, so but people change. The real thing is Simone Inzaghi was a real football passionate. He was studying every time, and probably this studying made a difference. One of the things I believe is that if you are a great football player like Maradona, this doesn't mean that you will become a great manager, because it's too easy for you playing football. You don't have to work out and find solution, etc. So I think that sometimes not being the star helps you being a better manager.
Well, I think we're going to have to wrap this up at some point. So I think the last thing we can talk about really is one of the questions you posed right at the start, which is if we're ever going to see his likes again. I mean, when you talk about the new Nesta, it is one of these things that does get wheeled out quite a lot every time there's a talented young defender or a homegrown player or anything. Of the current lot, I mean, I suppose the ones who jumped out to me, if there's ever going to be anyone who's going to fill that kind of role, would be Luis Felipe. Has shown a lot of talent and has certainly earned comparisons with Nesta in terms of his style of defending, not his ability, but his style. That's something. I mean, in the Primavera, there's been quite a bit of anticipation about Nicolo Armini making a breakthrough for a while, but that seems a long way away. And then the other one is the man who's wearing the number 13 shirt at AC Milan now, which is Alessio Romagnoli, and there's been no shortage of talk about whether or not he will end up back at the club he supports at some point as well. But do you think there's any chance of us seeing a player like Nesta again in the centre of a Lazio defence, and if it's likely to be anyone like that or anyone else?
I think I heard so many new Nesta coming from the Primavera. I mean, I can name you some names that probably you never heard. Sannibale, Ola.
Oh yeah, I remember.
I mean, they didn't even make it to professional football, and they were already the new Nesta. So I think the fact that football have changed so much, now you see central defenders that are very good in playing the ball more than defending. That made it very hard to find a new Nesta. Nesta was a different player, wasn't a playmaker. He was a defender. So maybe not as good as Nesta, but we can hope. Armini at the beginning gave me the impression, because as Nesta he was a left back, then he moved to central position. Now he moved back to the side position. So I don't know if he can be the new Nesta. It's going to be really difficult because football changed a lot. But yeah, it would be good to have another one coming from the Lazio Primavera and be so talented like Nesta.
I don't think we'll ever see his like again, really. I mean, he was one of a kind, I think, as a defender. The word that everyone always seems to use with Nesta is elegance, and you can see why, because that, it is tempting, I suppose, for a lot of defenders to use their physicality, to use their muscle to win challenges, to be the person who comes out with the ball from a challenge. But Nesta just wasn't that kind of player, really. I mean, his technique was incredible, his judgment, I've already mentioned, his intelligence, and I think
his sliding tackles was amazing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I can't remember who the famous quote was from, that if you go in off your feet as a defender, you've done something wrong, you made a mistake. But he kind of proved that wrong, because it seemed like every time he went off his feet, there was a reason for it, and usually he got it right.
Yeah, Mazzone was saying that in the penalty box, but remember Nesta making sliding tackle against Batistuta, that at that time was an incredible player. And I remember so many Lazio Fiorentina where Batistuta didn't do nothing at all, thanks to Nesta. He was unbelievable. Really, at the beginning of his career with Lazio, he was defending on his own because Chamot wasn't that good defender. And, he didn't have that great defense near to him. It was Nesta against everybody. And at that point, he was so good that he could really defend against anybody on his own. So,
well, I think we can happily say he surpassed Chamot. He outshone his idol. Yeah, definitely one of the greats, and a great place to start with the Lazio Icons. I think for me, he is definitely one of the, if not the most biggest figure, really, in the club's kind of recent history.
yeah, I agree. Okay, so this is going to be the beginning of a long series, right? Till football is back.
I think as long as the world allows it to be.
Well,
but yeah, I mean, thanks to everyone who's been giving us ideas. Sorry, we have been away for a couple of weeks, but we have been, like everyone else, trying to work out what exactly is going on. I do hope everyone is okay and is managing with this situation that we seem to all be in now, which isn't great. So hopefully we can give you some light relief, at least by talking about Lazio.
yeah, please, everybody, stay home, stay safe, and we'll do another great episode, I think, next week about a star. So tell us which Lazio players do you want that we talk about, and we'll try to do our best.
Bastos.
Oh, come on. Thanks, Alistair. Thank you, everybody. And remember our Patreon page, patreon.com/Lazio Lounge, to help us support our podcasts. And we'll talk again next week. Thank you. Bye.